Hello everyone, greetings to all of you who are watching this video once again. Dear Naga brothers and sisters, friends from other communities, I hope everyone is doing well. This is another video from me, and in this episode, I would like to share my understanding of a big question: why Nagas seek full self-determination and why India has resisted that demand. I'll try my best to explain why the Nagas often feel historically distinct from India and why the idea of a unique Naga history matters a lot in this movement. And I will also address some common questions people often ask, like why do Nagas use Indian money if they do not consider themselves as Indians? Where are the resources to run a country if they ever get independence? Can the Nagas survive on their own? And so on. And I will also try to give my best thoughts about a much bigger question, and that is why is India so interested in keeping this region? This will not be a final conclusion, though. It is simply the understanding I have reached after reading, listening, and reflecting over time and going through a lot of resources, both online and offline. I'm sharing this humbly so that more people, if not all, can understand the issue better and to remind everyone that the Nagas are not claiming anyone else's land. The Nagas are not rebels, but only asking to decide their own destiny on their own ancestral land. So let me begin with the historical basis of Naga self-determination. The Naga people have lived for centuries as independent hill communities, governed by village councils, customary laws, cultures, and the Morang system, the Morang institutions, or the youth dormitory. Each village was practically self-contained and self-governed. Their social, political, spiritual systems developed separately from the great Indian plains empires. We know of the Mauryas, the Guptas, the Mughals, all of which ruled mainland India. While those empires rose and fell, the Nagas lived their own way in the hills, untouched by those imperial systems. This historical separateness is one very strong foundation upon which the Nagas claim distinct identity and a unique history, one that was never woven into the Indian historical fabric. I will not go into the detail about the Naga movement again, but for the information of everyone and to be clear with its chronology, I will quickly outline the key political milestones that shaped this journey. Some of the political milestones that shaped the Naga movement are the Naga Labor Corps. In 1918, the Naga Club was formed by the Naga Labor Corps. Then in 1925, the Naga Raj movement led by Haipo Jadonang and later on by Rani Gaidinliu arose in the southern Naga region. And then in 1929, the memorandum to the Simon Commission was submitted by the Naga Club, asserting that the Nagas should not be included in any Indian arrangement. In 1946, formation of the Naga National Council (NNC) under Ezet Fizo, Angami Zapu Fizo, and we commonly know him as Ezet Fizo. 1947 Declaration of Naga Independence, one day before India's independence. And then in 1960, the 16-point agreement between the Naga People's Convention and the Indian government led to the creation of the state of Nagaland in 1963. Many saw this as progress, but others believed it ignored the larger dream of Naga unification, since many Nagas lived outside the newly created Nagaland state. 1975, the Shillong Accord was signed, where NNC leaders agreed to accept the Indian constitution. This caused a deep split among the Nagas. In 1980, we see the formation of the NSCN, National Socialist Council of Nagaland, by Isaac Chishisu, T.H. Muiva, and S.S. Kaplan to revive the Naga movement. They later on split into different factions. I will not go into that details because most of us are already aware of that. And then in 1997, there was the ceasefire agreement signed between the Nagas and the between the NSCN and the government of India. Then we know of the 2015 framework agreement that was signed between the NSC and IM and the Indian government. And later on, we also know of the agreed position signed between the NNPGs and the Indian government. This journey so far shows that the Naga issue has always been political and not criminal and not communal, but a political question of identity, consent, and future. So I'm moving on to the next question, which is why the desire for self-rule among the Nagas. This is not a rebellion, like I said, but self-determination. For the Nagas, the aspiration for independence is not rooted in hostility towards India or anyone else, for that matter. It is about the right to decide their own future, a principle recognized in international law, especially in decolonization contexts. The Nagas governed themselves long before the modern states existed in the region, so the call for self-determination is based on history and not hatred. It is based on identity and not ideology. It is a moral and political demand that every person should have the freedom to shape their own destiny. The next question is why the Nagas don't feel connected to India or don't feel one with India. This feeling is valid when we look at the history closely. The Nagas were never part of the Indian empires, never part of the Indian kingdoms, and were never governed by Indian systems until 1947 or before 1947. Their culture, worldview, social order evolved independently. When India celebrated independence, the Nagas felt they were simply being handed over from the British to the Indians without their consent. So Nagas are not a relic or a heritage to be handed over to anyone. That sense of being included by circumstance and not by choice is what continues to shape the Naga political identity today. The next question is about the practical realities, currency, administration, and independence. People often ask, if the Nagas want independence, why do they use Indian money? The answer is simple. As long as Naga areas are within India's constitutional framework, we naturally use Indian currency, Indian banks, and Indian systems. This is only legit and it is the legal and economic reality of living within the Indian Union. But dependence does not mean incapability. Because before independence, even British India depended on Britain for finance, governance, trade, and many other things. Every colonized nation goes through this phase. When sovereignty transfers, dependence gradually shifts to self-reliance. So the current dependence of the Naga regions on India is a symptom of colonization, not proof that the Nagas cannot govern themselves. The next question is why India resists separation? Why is India so much against the idea of Naga sovereignty? India's resistance to the idea of Naga sovereignty is driven by practical and political factors like territorial integrity, strategic importance, the natural resources. Practically, the Northeast region is rich in forest, oil, minerals, and hydropower potential, which are key to India's development goals. Another reason could be the administrative complexity, because the Naga inhabited areas stretch across several Indian states inhabited by other communities. In short, for New Delhi, the Naga question is not just political, it is also territorial, economic, and strategic. Then we have another question. Is it right for India to control without consent? Self-determination, first of all, the right of a people to decide their own political future. And then for India, it is territorial integrity, the right of a state to maintain its borders as India considers Naga regions as their own. The Naga case lies somewhere between the two after decolonization period when India's constitution came into force. The world had already recognized India's sovereignty and territorial boundaries. That could be one reason why India cannot think of losing its territory. However, political negotiation based on consent remains the most just and practical way forward. And before all these principles come into play, we must remember this. It is the people who must decide their own future. Questions like they cannot manage on their own are not so genuine. They are more interested in something else. Whether the Nagas remain poor or rich, developed or not, should not be India's concern, because freedom, by definition, means the right to choose one's own path, even if it begins with a struggle. This may remind some of us of the so-called white man's burden. Back in the days of the British rule, Western powers claimed it was their moral duty to civilize and uplift others, when in truth it was about control and exploitation. India, of all nations, should understand that mindset better than anyone because India itself once suffered under that same burden. So, India doesn't need to carry the so called white man's burden for the Nagas. We don't need saviors, we need understanding. We don't ask for charity, we stand for the right to manage our own destiny. Helping people stand on their own feet is noble, but holding them down out of fear for paternalism is not. The Nagas are not a burden for anyone to carry. We are people with our own destiny, our own culture, our own history, perfectly capable of shaping our future if given the space to do so. Another very common questions that we have is where are the resources for the Nagas if at all we get the independence? They're in the land, forest, rivers, minerals, hydropower potential. The problem is not the absence of resources, but who controls them. Right now, those resources are administered under Indian systems. Another question, very common among many people, is can the Nagas stand on their own? Well, every nation starts small. Take Japan, for example, a small island with limited natural resources. Yet, through discipline, innovation, and good governance, it became one of the world's leading economies. Progress depends on mindset, unity, and management, not just on size and wealth. What is the way forward? What is the solution? And we are in that process. The only sustainable path, I believe, is dialogue, recognition, and consent, which India may not agree. Should we surrender? The answer is in the air for us. My humble understanding, based on what I have read and heard and reflected upon, it is not the final word, but an honest attempt to look at both sides. The Naga story has always been about identity, dignity, and belonging. And as long as our hearts remember who we are, the Naga spirit will live on, stronger than the mountains where our forefathers walked. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, the power lies with the people. The reason the Nagas are still struggling for self determination today is because of disunity, largely because of disunity. Many Nagas already stand with the Indian system, while other Nagas are still fighting for the common dreams our forefathers died fighting for. And yes, those who are on the Indian side naturally will enjoy the advantage because that is how power dynamics work. But the dream of freedom is not dead, it is still alive. It is in our history, it is in our identity, and in our hope for the generations to come. So thank you so much for staying with me for this long. And if I have made any mistake, please feel free to leave your comments. I will try to explain or try to reply if I can. And I hope that someday the Naga people all around across the borders would understand one another better and come to live together in peace with the neighbors. Thank you. God bless you and Kukna live.